I received a call that my only daughter was in a Hawaiian ICU fighting for her life after emergency brain surgery. I dropped everything and flew 5,000 miles to be by her side. When I walked into that sterile, silent room, I found her alone. Her husband, the man who was supposed to protect her, was unreachable. Because he was on a 50-foot yacht celebrating a business deal with champagne and models. He didn't know that his biggest deal was with me, and the contract was about to be voided. What I did next didn't just cost him his money. I made sure his entire fabricated world vanished in under an hour. Before I tell you exactly how a retired risk manager dismantled a fintech empire from a hospital waiting room, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you believe that a father's love is the most powerful force on earth. The first tremor happened 2 days before the earthquake. It came through my laptop screen, a faint signal I almost dismissed as fatherly worry. I was at my home in Denver, Colorado. The quiet house feeling a little too large since my wife Sarah had passed. The mountains stood guard outside my window, a silent testament to permanence and strength. On the screen, my daughter Chloe's face was a little too bright. Her smile stretched a little too thin. She was calling from a balcony in Hawaii, the turquoise water, a perfect postcard blue behind her. "It's amazing, Dad," she said, her voice competing with the breeze. "Blake set all this up. It's supposed to be a work trip, but he made sure we got a suite with an ocean view. He's closing a huge round of funding." I nodded, watching her eyes instead of the scenery. They kept darting to her left, just out of frame. A nervous tick I hadn't seen since she was a kid, trying to explain a broken vase. "That's wonderful, honey. Is he there?" "He's prepping," she said, the hesitation lasting only a fraction of a second. "He's got a big meeting on a yacht later. You know, impressing the investors." Just then, his voice cut in from off-screen, sharp and dismissive. "Chloe, are you still talking to your dad? The Wi-Fi here costs a fortune. Besides, old-timers and high-speed finance don't exactly mix. Tell him we'll call when there's actual news." A shadow passed over Chloe's face before she forced the smile back into place. "I have to go, Dad. Blake's waiting. I love you." The screen went dark, leaving me with the reflection of my own furrowed brow. Old-timer. The word didn't sting as much as it revealed. Blake saw me as a relic, a man from an analog world who couldn't possibly grasp his digital genius. He was wrong. Risk is a timeless language. It doesn't care about fiber optics or blockchain. It's about human behavior, about greed and desperation. And on that video call, I could hear its faint, familiar accent in my daughter's strained voice. That unease, that subtle vibration of something wrong, was the first layer of a foundation that was about to crack wide open. I leaned back in my leather chair, the one Sarah always said made me look like a professor, and my eyes landed on a silver-framed photo on the mantelpiece. It was from Chloe's wedding 3 years ago. She was radiant, looking up at Blake with a trust so absolute it made my heart ache. Blake was smiling too, a confident, camera-ready smile that sold the image of a perfect husband. It was the same smile he'd used a year ago right here in this study. He had stood where the afternoon sun now streamed in, holding an iPad that displayed colorful, upward-trending graphs. He was pitching me not as a son-in-law asking for a loan, but as a visionary offering an opportunity. His company, Sterling Pay, was going to be a disruptor, a paradigm shift in the fintech space. The words flowed from him, slick, and practiced a torrent of buzzwords designed to make an old man feel out of his depth. "The user acquisition cost is minimal compared to the lifetime value of a client, Jim," he had said, calling me Jim, instead of Dad, as he always did when he wanted something. "We're not just moving money, we're creating a seamless financial ecosystem." My entire 40-year career had been spent auditing companies that used phrases like that. I was a risk management consultant for one of the largest insurance firms in the country. My job was to listen to exactly these kinds of pitches and find the single fatal flaw hidden beneath the jargon. My instincts told me Sterling Pay was a house of cards built on a shaky foundation of debt and ambition. The numbers were too perfect, the growth projections too aggressive. But my daughter was in love. She sat beside him, her hand on his arm, looking at me with pleading eyes. Eyes that said, "Please believe in him like I do." And against every professional instinct I had, I chose my daughter. "All right, Blake," I had said slowly. "I'll provide the $500,000 in seed money you need." Chloe's face lit up and Blake's smile widened. He reached out to shake my hand, but I held up a finger. "On one condition. We won't do this as a simple investment. My lawyer will draft it as a convertible secured loan." Blake's smile faltered for a second. "A secured loan, Jim, this is a formality. We're family." "Exactly," I had replied, my tone leaving no room for argument. "And family protects each other. This loan will be secured by your personal assets and your majority shares in Sterling Pay. It's just a safety net, a standard insurance policy." He and Chloe had exchanged a look. It was the kind of look that said, "Let the old man have his complicated paperwork." They saw it as an eccentricity, a relic of a bygone era of business. They didn't understand. I wasn't just writing a check. I was setting a tripwire. I was installing a firewall. I was creating a legal instrument with the precision of a scalpel, hoping I would never have to pick it up. That document filed away in my lawyer's office was the real investment. It was an investment in a truth I prayed would never need to come to light. In the months that followed, the red flags began to appear small at first, then more frequent. I'd see pictures Chloe posted online. A new Porsche in the driveway of their sprawling Silicon Valley home. A weekend trip to Aspen on a private jet. a $1,000 bottle of wine on a Tuesday. It was a lifestyle that a startup burning through seed money had no business funding. When I would gently inquire, Chloe's answers were always ready, delivered with a hint of condescension, as if she were quoting directly from a manual Blake had given her. "Dad, you don't understand the culture here. You have to project success to attract success. It's all about the image." I tried to explain the concept of burn rate of fiscal responsibility. "Image doesn't pay salaries, Chloe. It doesn't build infrastructure. It's just smoke." "It's not smoke, Dad, it's marketing." She'd counter, her voice tight with frustration. "Blake knows what he's doing. The next round of funding is just around the corner." Each conversation left a sour taste in my mouth. My professional experience, a lifetime spent identifying financial rot, was being dismissed as the ramblings of a man who didn't understand the new economy. I saw a classic pattern of mismanagement, a reckless disregard for capital that almost always ended in collapse. But I was trapped. To push harder would be to risk pushing my daughter away, to be the meddling father-in-law she and Blake already thought I was. So I backed off. I chose family peace over financial prudence. I watched from the sidelines as they lived a life funded by my money and sustained by a fantasy. That choice haunted me. Every cheerful photo she sent was a reminder of the conversation I didn't have, the warning I didn't press. I had spent a lifetime advising corporations on how to avoid catastrophe, but I had failed to protect my own daughter from the one brewing in her own home. The ground beneath her feet was unstable, and I had known it. And I had done nothing. That quiet failure, that decision to remain silent, was the last moment of peace I would know. I turned away from the dark screen, the silence in the study suddenly feeling heavy. My gaze drifted to the mantelpiece, landing on a silver-framed photograph. It was from Chloe's wedding day 3 years ago. She was stunning, a vision in white, looking up at Blake with a kind of pure, unguarded trust that only a daughter can have. And Blake, he was smiling. It was a perfect smile, a confident, camera-ready smile that sold the image of a storybook husband. It was the same smile he had worn a year ago, standing right here in this room on the Persian rug my wife Sarah had picked out decades earlier. The memory was vivid. He stood in the afternoon light, not in a tuxedo, but in a tailored Silicon Valley uniform of a cashmere sweater and designer jeans. He wasn't holding my daughter's hand. He was holding an iPad, its screen glowing with colorful upward trending graphs. He was pitching me not as a son-in-law seeking help, but as a visionary bestowing an opportunity. His company, Sterling Pay, was going to be a disruptor, a paradigm shift in the world of financial technology. The words flowed from him slick and polished, a cascade of buzzwords meant to overwhelm and impress. He spoke of synergy, scalability, and first-mover advantage. He painted a picture of a future where his app would be on every phone, a seamless ecosystem for a new generation. My entire 40-year career had been spent in rooms just like this one, listening to men just like Blake. As a risk management consultant, my job was to see past the polished presentation and find the cracks in the foundation. My gut, honed by decades of identifying fraud and failure, was screaming at me. The numbers on his iPad were too perfect. The growth projections were too optimistic. He had all the right answers, but none of the right substance. It was a beautiful narrative, but the math didn't add up. I was about to deliver my calm, professional refusal when I looked past him and saw my daughter. Chloe was sitting on the edge of the leather sofa, her hands clasped together, her eyes shining with pride. She wasn't seeing the flawed business model, she was seeing the brilliant man she loved. Her entire posture was a silent plea, a testament to her unwavering belief in him. Her look said, "Please, Dad. Please believe in him the way I do." In that moment, I wasn't a risk manager. I was a father who wanted to see that light in his daughter's eyes stay lit for as long as possible. A father who didn't want to be the old-timer who stood in the way of her husband's dream. And so, against every instinct that had served me so well for so long, I made a decision. "All right, Blake," I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "I'll provide the $500,000 in seed money you need." Chloe's face erupted in a joyful smile, and she rushed over to hug me. Blake's professional smile widened, a glint of triumph in his eyes. He reached out to shake my hand, a gesture of sealing the deal, but I held up a finger, stopping him. "On one condition. We will not do this as a simple investment. My lawyer will draft the agreement as a convertible secured loan." Blake's smile faltered just for a second. "A secured loan, Jim. This is just a formality between family." "Exactly," I replied, my voice steady, leaving no room for negotiation. "And family protects each other. The loan will be secured by your personal assets, including your majority shares in Sterling Pay. Think of it as a safety net, a standard insurance policy." He and Chloe exchanged a quick glance. I knew what they were thinking. They saw it as the fussy, overly cautious demand of an old man, a bit of complicated legal paperwork to humor me. They didn't see the teeth hidden within the clauses. They didn't understand that the document I was proposing wasn't just a contract, it was a contingency plan. They signed the papers a week later, seeing only the $500,000 figure. They didn't pay attention to the detailed provisions for default, for breach of fiduciary duty, for misrepresentation of assets. They saw a check. I saw a tripwire, a carefully calibrated mechanism that would lie dormant unless a specific kind of pressure was applied. I called it my insurance policy. It was an investment not in his company, but in a truth I prayed would never have to be cashed in. The months that followed the signing of the papers were a slow, steady drip of red flags. I would call Chloe once a week, and sometimes I would ask about the progress of Sterling Pay. If Blake was in the room, he'd take the phone, his voice booming with manufactured enthusiasm. "We're on the brink of a major breakthrough, Jim," he'd say, the words always vague, always promising. "The deal is just about to close," or "the metrics are going through the roof. We're about to explode." It was always about the future, never about the present. When I asked for concrete details, for a look at the current financials, he'd laugh it off. "Can't get into the weeds, Jim. Non-disclosure agreements, you know how it is. It's a delicate phase." I did know how it was. It was the language of a man stalling for time. Meanwhile, the evidence of their lifestyle was impossible to ignore. A brand new Porsche 911, a sleek silver bullet, appeared in their driveway in a photo Chloe posted online. Then came a weekend trip to a ski resort in Aspen, with pictures of them laughing in a hot tub, snow-capped mountains behind them. I saw a new Cartier watch on her wrist in one photo, a watch that cost more than my first car. This was not the careful, frugal existence of a startup founder trying to make every dollar of seed money count. This was the behavior of a man spending money he didn't have. I finally brought it up during a call with Chloe, trying to frame it as gentle concern. Honey, that's a beautiful car, but a Porsche is a significant expense for a company that hasn't even launched its product yet. Is everything all right with the finances? There was a pause, and I could hear the defensiveness in her voice when she finally answered. Dad, you just don't understand how the startup world works. It's different now. She sounded like she was reciting a line she had practiced. You have to project success to attract success. It's all about the image. When investors see Blake driving a Porsche, they don't see an expense. They see a winner. They see someone they want to bet on. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Chloe, I spent 40 years evaluating companies. Image doesn't pay salaries. It doesn't build infrastructure. It's just smoke. The numbers have to add up eventually. And they will, she said, her voice sharp with irritation. Blake knows what he's doing. You have to trust him. You have to trust me. And that was it. That was the choice she laid before me. Question her husband's judgment and risk a rift between us, or stay silent and watch them drive full speed towards a cliff. My professional mind screamed at me. This was a textbook case of a company in a death spiral, burning through capital with a reckless disregard for the future. The extravagance wasn't a sign of confidence. It was a symptom of panic. But my father's heart told a different story. It saw a daughter fiercely loyal who had pinned all her hopes and dreams on this man. To attack him would be to attack her. I would become the villain in her story, the meddling, out-of-touch father-in-law who was jealous of his son-in-law's success. I had already lost my wife. I couldn't bear the thought of creating a silence between myself and my only child. So I made a choice. I chose peace over prudence. Okay, honey, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I understand. I trust you. I hung up the phone and stared out the window at the steadfast, unyielding mountains. I had spent a lifetime teaching my daughter the importance of honesty and integrity, and yet I had just validated a lie. I had given my blessing to a fantasy because I was afraid of the conflict the truth would create. That decision settled deep within me, a quiet, heavy regret. I didn't know it then, but my silence was the last bit of fuel Blake needed. I had ignored the red flags, and in doing so, I had given him the green light to drive straight into the heart of the storm. The phone rang at 3:17 in the morning. In the deep, unbroken silence of a Colorado night, the sound was an act of violence. It wasn't the gentle chime I had set for family, but a harsh digital shriek reserved for unknown numbers. I rolled over, my heart already pounding, and squinted at the screen. The area code was 808, Hawaii. For a brief, irrational moment, I thought it was Chloe, calling to apologize for the tense video chat earlier. But this was a call from a place far beyond a simple misunderstanding. I answered, my voice thick with sleep. Hello, is this Mr. James Callahan? The voice on the other end was young female and frayed at the edges with panic. It was cracking under a pressure it was not built to withstand. This is he. Who is this? My name is Anya Sharma. I'm a colleague of Chloe's. We're working on the architectural project here in Honolulu. She took a shaky breath and the words tumbled out in a rush. Mr. Callahan, there's been an incident. We were at a client dinner and Chloe, she just collapsed. An ambulance came. The doctors, they said it's a brain aneurysm. She's in emergency surgery right now at Queen's Medical Center. The world tilted. The four walls of my bedroom seemed to recede, the floor falling away beneath me. A wave of cold, terrifying nausea washed over me. My daughter, my Chloe. In surgery. The words didn't compute. They were just sounds, meaningless and cruel. A different man might have dropped the phone. A different man might have screamed or cursed or begged a God he didn't believe in. My training, my entire life's discipline did not allow for that. As Anya kept talking, her voice a panicked buzz in my ear, a switch flipped in my mind. The part of me that was a terrified father receded, locked away behind a thick steel door. The part of me that had spent 40 years managing catastrophic risk took control. It was a cold, efficient, and logical part of me. It didn't feel panic. It assessed data and initiated protocols. My left hand held the phone to my ear, steady as a rock. With my right hand, I reached over, opened the laptop on my nightstand, and powered it on. The screen bathed the dark room in a cold blue light. And I've been trying to call her husband. Anya was saying, her voice breaking. I've called Blake a dozen times, but his phone goes straight to voicemail. The hospital needs a family member, and I found your number in Chloe's emergency contacts. My fingers were already flying across the keyboard. United Airlines. One-way flights. Denver to Honolulu. First available. My mind processed her words as just another data point in the equation. Variable son-in-law is unreachable. Implication. I am the sole point of contact. Action required immediate physical presence. Anya. I said, my own voice sounding strangely calm, detached, as if it belonged to someone else. You did the right thing. Tell me the surgeon's name if you have it. Dr. Aris Thorne, she said, sniffing. He's the head of neurosurgery. They said he's the best. Den to HNL. 7:15. Arrives 11:30 a.m. local time. I clicked, confirm purchase. My credit card information, already saved. The confirmation email appeared on the screen almost instantly. Okay, Anya. I have a flight in 4 hours. I will be there by lunchtime. I need you to do one thing for me. Go to the surgical waiting room, find a nurse, and tell them her father is on his way, and that I have given consent for any and all necessary procedures. Do you understand? Yes. Yes, of course, Mr. Callahan. There was a wave of relief in her voice. An adult was in charge now. I ended the call and placed the phone gently back on the nightstand. The house was silent once more, but it was a different silence now. It was the silence of a command center that has just received its mission. The fear was still there, a roaring beast behind that steel door in my mind, but it was no longer in control. Right now, it was just fuel. I stood up and began to pack. There was no time for grief. There was only time for action. The airplane was a sealed tube of recycled air and quiet misery hurtling through a black, starless sky. Around me, other passengers slept, their heads lolling against headrests, lost in dreams. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. I sat staring at the dark screen of my phone, the single bright object in my small, dim world. My thumb, moving with a will of its own, pressed the contact photo of Blake. It was a picture of him and Chloe on a sailboat, both of them tanned and smiling. A perfect couple. A perfect lie. I pressed the call button for the 10th time. The result was the same. A few rings, then the familiar, hated click as it switched over to his voicemail. And then his voice, smooth and polished, filled with a manufactured importance that made my teeth ache. Hey, you've reached Blake Sterling. The recording began a little too loud, a little too cheerful. Can't get to the phone right now, probably in the middle of closing a deal or changing the world. You know how it is. Leave a message and I'll get back to you when I can. The call ended. I lowered the phone, the cheerful, arrogant words echoing in the silent cabin. Closing a deal. The phrase hung in the air, rotten and false. My mind, a frantic engine of worry, was picturing my daughter on an operating table, her life in the hands of a stranger. I saw the sterile lights, the masked faces, the cold, gleaming instruments. Every fiber of my being, every protective instinct I had as a father, was screaming in silent terror. It was a physical pain, a crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. And mixed with that terror was a new emotion rising like a cold tide. It was rage, not a hot, explosive anger, but a deep, glacial fury. Where was he? Where was the man who had stood before me and promised to love and protect my daughter? What deal could possibly be more important than his wife's life? A real professional, a man truly on the verge of a major success, is never unreachable. He has assistants. He has contingencies. His phone is a lifeline, not an accessory. Blake's message wasn't the sign of a busy executive. It was the sign of a man performing the role of one. I looked out the small, thick window at the endless darkness. The red flags I had ignored for months were no longer just flags. They were sirens wailing in my memory. The Porsche, the expensive trips, the vague, hollow answers. It was all part of the same performance. The man on the voicemail was the same man who had sold me a fantasy in my own study. He wasn't closing a deal. He was just selling a story. And my daughter, my brilliant, trusting Chloe, was paying the price for it. She was lying in a hospital alone while her husband was off playing the part of a big shot. The fear for her life began to merge with the anger I felt toward him. They twisted together, hardening into something new, something sharp and focused. The mission was no longer just to get to my daughter's side. A second objective was beginning to form, crystallizing out of the dark mixture of my grief and fury. I needed to understand what Blake was hiding. I needed to uncover the truth he was so desperate to avoid. I raised the phone and called him again. Voicemail. The same cheerful, empty promise. Closing a deal. I whispered to myself in the dark. The words were no longer just annoying. They were an admission of guilt. And I, the man he dismissed as an old-timer, was flying across the ocean to audit the accounts. The hospital was a world of hushed urgency. The air smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. I found the surgeon, a man named Dr. Thorne, in a small windowless office. He looked as though he had aged a decade in the last several hours, his eyes weary behind his glasses. He spoke in a low, tired voice, explaining the complexities of the surgery. He used words like rupture and hemorrhage. He told me they had clipped the aneurysm and stopped the bleeding, that Chloe was stable, but that she was in a medically induced coma. The next 48 hours, he said, were critical. I thanked him for his work, my own voice sounding distant and hollow. Then a nurse led me to the ICU. She pushed open a heavy door, and the world narrowed to the space of a single room. The only sounds were the rhythmic hiss of a ventilator and the steady electronic beep of a heart monitor. And there, in the center of a web of tubes and wires, was Chloe. She looked impossibly small in the large bed, her face pale against the white pillow, a bandage wrapped around her head. My daughter, my vibrant, brilliant daughter, was reduced to a fragile stillness. A wave of utter helplessness washed over me. I wanted to rage, to smash something, to scream at the injustice of it all. But what crushed me most, what stole the air from my lungs, was the stark, undeniable fact that she was alone. The chair next to her bed was empty. The silence where her husband should have been was the loudest sound in the room. Just then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A text message from an unknown number. It was from Anya, Chloe's colleague. I opened it. There was a photo so bright and vivid it seemed to burn my eyes. It was Blake. He was on the deck of a magnificent yacht, the Hawaiian sun glinting off the deep blue water behind him. He was holding a glass of champagne, his head thrown back in laughter, surrounded by a group of smiling, well-dressed people. He looked like a king celebrating a great victory. Below the photo was a single line of text. I thought you should know where his important meeting was. In that instant, something inside me shifted. The roaring, chaotic grief of a terrified father went quiet. It didn't vanish. It solidified. It cooled and hardened into something else entirely. It became a silent, diamond-hard resolve. The part of me that spent a lifetime analyzing failure, predicting betrayal, and calculating consequences came online. James Callahan, the worried father, stepped aside, and Jim Callahan, the risk manager, took his place. My rage was not loud, not. It was a cold, quiet engine that was just beginning to hum. I pulled the empty visitor's chair to my daughter's bedside. I sat down, placed my briefcase on the floor, and took out my laptop. I opened it on my lap, the soft click of the latch echoing in the quiet room. As the screen came to life, bathing my face in its cool, impersonal glow, the plan began to form. It was not a plan of revenge. It was a plan of correction. A meticulous, systematic, and absolute correction. The first call I made was not to a friend or another family member. There was no one else to call for comfort. There was only one person to call for action. I looked at the clock on my phone. It was nearly 1 in the afternoon in Hawaii, which meant it was 5 in the afternoon in Denver. My lawyer, David Reed, would still be in his office. I dialed his private number. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm and familiar. "Jim," he said, "I was sorry to hear about Chloe. My assistant saw the flight booking. I was about to call. Whatever you need." There was no time to acknowledge the sympathy. Emotions were a luxury, a currency I could not afford to spend. "David, whom?" I said, my voice as flat and cold as a sheet of steel. "Activate the Sterling file. I want everything ready in 12 hours. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, but it was not a pause of hesitation. It was the silence of a professional mind shifting gears, accessing a locked part of his memory. "Understood, Jim," he said, his tone now all business. "I'm opening the encrypted drive now. I'll be on standby all night." I hung up. The Sterling file. It was a name I had hoped I would never have to speak again. You don't spend 40 years as a risk manager analyzing worst-case scenarios for billion-dollar corporations without applying the same principles to your own life. When I gave Blake that $500,000 loan, I didn't just give him my money. I opened a file. It was an instinct, a professional habit I couldn't turn off. Over the next few weeks after the deal was signed, I had used my old contacts in the credit and corporate intelligence industries to quietly compile a complete picture of Blake Sterling. It wasn't malicious. It was just due diligence. The file contained his full credit history, a background check, and copies of the initial financial statements he had shown me. It was a comprehensive, confidential risk assessment of my own son-in-law. It was my insurance policy tucked away on a secure server, a silent testament to a doubt I had refused to admit even to myself. I had prayed it would do nothing but gather digital dust. Now it was my entire arsenal. My laptop was connected to the hospital's Wi-Fi, and David's face soon appeared on my screen via a secure video call. He was in his familiar wood-paneled office in Denver, a fortress of law books and quiet order. I was in a cold, sterile ICU waiting area, the rhythmic beeping of my daughter's heart monitor, a constant, grim metronome. In the background, we were 2 old soldiers separated by an ocean preparing for a battle. "I'm sending you the quarterly reports Blake emailed me last month," I said, my voice low. He claimed they showed steady growth. At the time, I didn't want to look too closely. "They're coming through now," David said, his eyes flicking to another screen. "Okay, I have them open. Page 3, cash flow." I navigated to the same page. "Look at the second line item," I said, my finger tracing the number on my own screen. "He's listed $700,000 in prepaid service contracts. He's counting money he hasn't earned yet as current cash flow. That's not revenue, David. That's a liability. He's artificially inflating the health of the company. It's a classic deception." David was silent for a moment, his legal mind processing the implication. "Fraudulent misrepresentation," he murmured. "It's a direct violation of Section 4, Clause B of our loan agreement, the clause on accurate financial reporting." We kept digging. For hours we worked in a state of quiet, intense focus. He was the legal hammer. I was the financial scalpel. I guided him through the labyrinth of Blake's creative accounting. "Pull up the corporate expense reports for the last 6 months," I instructed. cross-referenced them with Chloe's social media posts. There was a flurry of typing on his end. "My God," he said after a minute. "A $10,000 charge at a jeweler in Maui listed under client entertainment." Chloe posted a picture of a new diamond bracelet the next day. "Keep going," I urged. "A recurring monthly charge for a cloud software subscription that perfectly matches the lease payment on a 2024 Porsche 911. And there I said, my eyes locking onto a single massive charge from 3 days ago. A $50,000 expense paid to a yacht charter company in Honolulu. The description reads, "Mobile Board Meeting and Investor Summit." David looked up from his papers, his face grim on my screen. "The yacht party," he said. "He didn't just use my money to fund his lifestyle." I said, the cold rage in my chest, burning like dry ice. "He used my money to commit fraud, and he documented all of it. He's been building his own cage, David. All we have to do is lock the door." The discovery of the yacht party expense was the first loose thread. And as any man who has spent a lifetime examining the fabric of lies will tell you, once you find a thread, you pull. For the next several hours, with the steady beep of the heart monitor as our only soundtrack, David and I pulled. We unraveled the entire tapestry of deceit that was Blake Sterling's life. My initial $500,000 investment was our starting point. From his office in Denver, David accessed the corporate bank statements for Sterling Pay, which our loan agreement gave us the right to audit. He shared his screen with me, and I stared at the columns of numbers, my mind sifting through the data, searching for the patterns I knew I would find. It didn't take long. The $500,000 wire transfer from my account was clear on the statement from 10 months ago. What followed was a masterclass in fraud. There were no significant payments to software development firms, no major expenses for server infrastructure or cybersecurity. The payroll was laughably small, consisting of Blake and a handful of junior assistants. The money hadn't been used to build a company. It had been used to fund a fantasy. "David," I said, my voice low and even. "Look at the transfer 2 days after my investment. $30,000 paid directly to American Express." There was a rustle of papers on his end. "I'm looking at Blake's personal credit report from the Sterling file now," David said. "That $30,000 exactly matches the outstanding balance he was carrying on his platinum card at the time. He paid off his personal debt." And so it went. We followed the money, and it drew a map not of a business, but of one man's bottomless vanity. $20,000 wired to a dealership in Palo Alto, a down payment on the Porsche. $70,000 in transfers to a travel agency that specialized in luxury vacations. He was using the corporate account as his personal piggy bank, disguising his shopping sprees and lavish trips as business expenses. My money, the money meant to secure my daughter's future, had paid for his designer suits and 5-star hotels. The more we dug, the more a horrifying question began to form. If the money wasn't going into the company, what exactly was Sterling Pay? I had. David used his legal access to search for any patents, trademarks for proprietary software, or technical filings associated with the company. The search came back empty. There was nothing. No intellectual property, no unique code, nothing but a slick website and a fancy logo. And then I understood. It wasn't a company. It was a stage. It was a beautifully designed set, complete with a charismatic lead actor, Blake Sterling. The user interface he had shown me on his iPad was nothing more than a series of mock-up images, a digital costume. There was no engine behind it. There was no product. It was a modern-day Ponzi scheme. He was using my investment to create the illusion of a thriving, successful business, all in order to attract the next bigger round of investors. Their money wouldn't have gone to build a product either. It would have gone to pay for an even more lavish lifestyle, to fund an even more convincing performance. That's when the true nature of the trip to Hawaii became clear. He wasn't celebrating a success. He was staging his most desperate performance yet. The company was out of money. My $500,000 was gone. He was on the verge of being exposed as a fraud. The yacht party, the champagne, the confident laughter in that photograph, it was all a last-ditch gamble. He was a cornered animal, putting on one last show to lure new prey before the traps sprang shut around him. He was so consumed by his own survival, so desperate to keep the lie going, that his wife lying broken in a hospital bed just a few miles away had become an inconvenient distraction. I closed my eyes for a moment, the full, ugly truth settling upon me. He hadn't just been a bad husband. He was a parasite. He had attached himself to my daughter, to her trust, to my money, and had been slowly draining the life out of both. I looked over at Chloe, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm set by a machine. She was in a fight for her life, and the man who was supposed to be her protector was the very disease that threatened to consume everything. I had the diagnosis now, and I knew with a cold and absolute certainty that the only cure was to cut him out. Completely. The hours of analysis were over. The frantic search for evidence was done. Now came the quiet, methodical work of forging weapons. On my screen, I watched David Reed's cursor move across legal documents with a lifetime of practiced efficiency. There was a grim satisfaction in it, like watching a master craftsman sharpen a set of perfectly balanced blades. This was not going to be a messy, emotional lawsuit that would drag on for years, draining our resources and reopening wounds. That is what Blake would expect. That is what a lesser man would do. Our approach was different. It was to be a swift, surgical, and silent strike. David had finished the first document. It was a formal notice of loan default and acceleration. It was not a request. It was a declaration. In simple, brutal language, it cited the specific clauses of our agreement that Blake had violated the fraudulent misrepresentation of company financials, the co-opting of corporate funds for personal use. And because of these violations, it stated that the entire $500,000 plus interest was due and payable immediately. It was a single sheet of paper that functioned as a financial guillotine. Blake had built the device himself when he signed the contract. We were simply pulling the lever. The second document was the application for a lien and asset seizure. This was the cage. Because the loan was secured, this document gave us the legal right to ask a court to immediately freeze every asset Blake had foolishly listed as collateral. His majority shares in the hollow shell that was Sterling Pay. The Porsche he so proudly displayed as a trophy of his supposed success. The brokerage account he used to play the market. With the filing of this paper, his financial world would be flash-frozen, every escape route sealed. He would be trapped inside the burning building of his own lies with no way out. Finally, David drafted the third and perhaps most elegant weapon. It was an anonymous memorandum, a 2-page summary of Sterling Pay's true financial state stripped of all emotion and loaded with verifiable facts. It detailed the inflated revenue, the hidden liabilities, and the misuse of investor capital. It was a document designed not for a judge, but for the very investors Blake was trying to lure on that yacht. It would be sent from a secure, untraceable email address. It would not destroy him legally, but it would annihilate his reputation. It would ensure that the name Blake Sterling was toxic in any investment circle for the rest of his life. When the last document was finalized and saved as a secure PDF ready to be deployed at my command, a quiet fell between us. The only sound was the steady rhythmic beep of Chloe's heart monitor. I turned my gaze from the cold light of the laptop screen to the warm, still form of my daughter in the bed beside me. The tubes and wires seemed to fade away, and all I could see was the little girl who used to fall asleep with her head on my chest. A fierce, protective instinct older and more powerful than any legal contract surged through me. I leaned closer to the microphone of my laptop. "He's not getting a cent from her, David," I said. My voice barely a whisper, but harder than stone. Not from her money, not from her insurance. Nothing. I understand, Jim David replied softly. He won't. The trap was set. The weapons were armed. All the intricate pieces of the plan were in place, waiting for a single command. I closed the laptop. The screen went dark and the waiting began. All we needed now was for the prey to walk home. The waiting had a rhythm. The beep of the heart monitor from Chloe's room. The soft chime of the elevator down the hall. The hushed conversations of nurses during their shift change. For 18 hours I sat in that sterile quiet, a silent sentinel fueled by stale coffee and a cold, singular purpose. The files were ready. The plan was in place. Every contingency had been accounted for. The hours didn't feel long. They felt like the final quiet moments of a countdown. And then I heard him. He didn't arrive quietly. He arrived in a rush of expensive fabric and feigned panic, his footsteps echoing down the linoleum corridor. He burst into the waiting area, a perfect portrait of a distraught husband. His hair was artfully disheveled. His $1,000 suit was wrinkled in a way that suggested a sleepless, frantic night. His tie was loosened at his throat, as if he'd been struggling for air. His eyes were red-rimmed and bloodshot, and if I didn't know better, I might have mistaken it for the mark of grief. But I am a man who has spent his life studying details. I could smell the faint sour scent of stale champagne on him, the odor of a long party, not a long vigil. His exhaustion was real, but it was the exhaustion of a performer coming off a very long stage, not of a husband worried for his wife. He rushed to the nurse's station, his voice loud and filled with a theatrical anguish meant for everyone to hear. My wife, he announced, his voice cracking on cue. Chloe Sterling. I just got the messages. I was in an unbreakable meeting. Is she okay? I need to see her, please. A nurse pointed him towards me, towards the small family waiting area just outside Chloe's ICU room. He turned, already composing his face into a mask of sorrow for his next audience. He strode forward, ready to collapse into the empty chair, ready to perform his grief. And then he saw me. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply sat in my chair, my hands resting on my knees, and watched him. I watched the performance drain from his face as if a plug had been pulled. The practiced anguish vanished, replaced by a flicker of raw, genuine shock. The lines of sorrow around his mouth slackened into a slack-jawed gape. His forward momentum stopped so abruptly he almost stumbled. The actor had suddenly found an unexpected critic sitting in the front row, and he had forgotten all his lines. Jim, he stammered, his voice a full octave lower than the one he had used with the nurses. He used my first name, not the title of a father. The dynamic had already shifted. We were no longer family. We were opponents. What are you doing here? His shock quickly curdled into something else. Annoyance. Irritation. My presence was an inconvenient fact that ruined his carefully constructed narrative. A grieving husband rushing to his wife's side from an important meeting was a sympathetic character. A man being confronted by his father-in-law was something else entirely. I was an uninvited character in his play, and my quiet presence was wrecking the scene. I looked at him, at the expensive wrinkled suit and the bloodshot eyes, and I saw through every layer of his performance. He wasn't just a bad husband. He was a bad actor. I've been waiting for you, Blake, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying across the space between us with the weight out of all the hours I had sat in that chair. I think it's time we had a talk. I looked at the man my daughter had married. The performative grief had evaporated from his face, leaving behind a residue of panic and resentment. He was an actor who had just realized the audience knew his lines were a lie. I didn't raise my voice. There was no need. The quiet in the ICU waiting area was a pressure chamber, and every word spoken had immense weight. Blake, I said, my voice low and even. We need to talk. In a private room. It wasn't a request. He understood that. He glanced toward Chloe's room, perhaps hoping to use her as a shield or an excuse, but he saw no advantage there. He gave a short, jerky nod. I stood up and led the way down the corridor. Our footsteps were the only sound, a stark, rhythmic beat on the polished linoleum. He was walking a few feet behind me, and I could feel his frantic energy, the frantic whirring of a mind trying to calculate new angles, new lies. He was a cornered animal, and he was searching for an escape route. He wouldn't find one. I stopped at a small glass-walled conference room, the kind hospitals use for difficult conversations with families. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was sterile and cold. A long, impersonal table, a dozen uncomfortable chairs, and on the far wall, a large television screen was powered on. On that screen, life-sized and perfectly composed in his wood-paneled office thousands of miles away, sat David Reed. Blake stopped dead in the doorway. He stared at David's image, his face instantly pale. The annoyance I had seen earlier was now replaced by a jolt of pure, undiluted fear. This was a complication he had not anticipated. He was prepared for a tearful, emotional confrontation with a grieving father. He was not prepared for a legal proceeding with my lawyer of 30 years. "What is this?" he asked, his voice a choked whisper. "A conversation," I said, gesturing to the chair across the table from me. "Please sit down." He hesitated for a moment, then walked stiffly to the chair and sat on its edge as if ready to bolt. I sat down opposite him, the large screen with David's impassive face looming over his shoulder, like a silent judge. For a long moment I said nothing. I let the silence in the room grow, letting it press in on him. I watched the sweat begin to bead on his forehead. Then I took out my phone and placed it gently on the center of the table between us. I slid it across the polished surface until it was directly in front of him. The screen was lit up, displaying the photograph from the yacht. The bright sun, the blue water, his own face, head thrown back in triumphant laughter, a champagne glass held high. I leaned forward slightly. "Was this your meeting, Blake?" I asked, my voice still quiet. "The one you couldn't leave?" He stared at the picture, then looked up at me, his eyes darting nervously. The lies came tumbling out, clumsy and desperate. "Jim, you have to understand. That picture doesn't show the whole story." That was the final moment, the handshake moment with the Hong Kong investors. It was a $500 million deal for the company, for Chloe, for our future. My phone was off. They insisted on it for security. I had no idea about Chloe until I got back to shore. I swear to you, I came as fast as I could. He was a good liar. He infused his voice with just the right amount of desperate sincerity. He looked me in the eyes, trying to sell the performance. I let him finish. I let him lay all his cards on the table, all his false alibis and justifications. I let him build his entire defense on that single flimsy foundation of a lie. Then I picked up my phone. "It's a good story, Blake. Very detailed. The only problem is the data." I tapped the screen. Every photo taken with a smartphone has a digital timestamp embedded in the file itself. It's called metadata. This photo was taken yesterday at precisely 4:15 in the afternoon, Hawaiian Standard Time. I slid a single sheet of paper from a folder beside me. It was a copy of the preliminary report from the surgical team. "This is Dr. Thorne's report. You can see the entry time at the top. The emergency craniotomy to relieve the catastrophic pressure on Chloe's brain began at 4:03 in the afternoon." I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands on the table. "So let's be clear about the timeline. While a team of surgeons was drilling a hole in your wife's skull to save her life, you were approximately 30 miles offshore, popping a bottle of champagne to celebrate a deal that, as we now know, never existed. Is that a correct and accurate assessment of the situation?" The color drained from his face. The story was gone. The excuses were gone. All he was left with was the stark, ugly, and irrefutable truth. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The mask of the successful entrepreneur, the loving husband, didn't just crack. It disintegrated, turning to dust, revealing the hollow, pathetic man underneath. He stared at me, his eyes wide with the terror of being truly and completely seen. Blake's face was a mess of shattered confidence. His lies about the yacht party had crumbled, and he was left exposed, a con man caught in the spotlight. He tried to rally to find some new angle, some new performance that could save him. He puffed up his chest, a pathetic attempt to regain some authority. "What is this, Jim?" he sneered, his voice thin and brittle. "Some kind of interrogation. You have no right to question me. I'm her husband." Before I could answer, a calm, clear voice filled the room. It came from the large screen on the wall where David Reed sat, his hands steepled, his expression unreadable. "On the contrary, Mr. Sterling." David said, his tone as dry as old paper. "This isn't a discussion. This is a notification." As if on cue, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. I slid it across the table. It landed in front of Blake with a soft, definitive thud. "My associate in Honolulu had this delivered an hour ago," I said. "I believe you'll want to look at it." Blake stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. Hesitantly, he opened it. Inside, nestled on top, was a single sheet of paper. David's voice continued from the screen, precise and relentless. "What you are looking at, Mr. Sterling, is a notice of loan default and acceleration. 10 months ago, Mr. Callahan provided you with $500,000. You have repeatedly referred to this as an investment. It was not. It was a convertible secured loan, the terms of which you signed and agreed to." Blake's eyes scanned the page, his breathing becoming shallow. "As we have just established," David went on, "and as we have documented with your own company's expense reports, you have violated multiple clauses of that agreement. Specifically Section 4, regarding the accurate and truthful representation of company financials, and Section 5, regarding the use of loaned capital for its intended business purpose, not for the payment of personal debts and the funding of lavish personal entertainment." Blake looked up, his face a mask of confusion. "What? What does this mean?" "It means," David said with no hint of sympathy, "that due to these breaches, the lender, Mr. Callahan, is exercising his right to accelerate the loan. The full amount plus accrued interest is due and payable, effective immediately." Blake let out a short, incredulous laugh. "That's insane. I don't have that kind of cash. The company doesn't." "We are aware of that," I said, speaking for the first time in several minutes. "Which is why you'll want to look at the second document in the folder." His trembling fingers fumbled with the first page, revealing the document beneath it. It was a court filing. A lien. Because the loan was secured, David explained, his voice a steady, dispassionate drone, your failure to pay triggers the collateral clause. As of this morning, we have filed a lien against all assets listed in that agreement. That includes your 70% majority share in Sterling Pay. It includes the 2024 Porsche 911 registered in your name. And it includes the full contents of your Charles Schwab brokerage account. All of it is now frozen. And all of it is now the legal property of Mr. Callahan, to be liquidated to cover the debt. The reality of the words began to sink in. I watched as Blake's mind tried to process the information. His company, his car, his stocks, gone. In the space of a single sentence, his entire net worth had been reduced to zero. He was personally, financially wiped out. But I wasn't finished. "And then there's the matter of your professional reputation." "Blake," I said, leaning forward. "What little is left of it?" He looked at me, his eyes hollow. "About an hour ago," I continued, "just before you graced us with your presence, David's office sent an anonymous but thoroughly detailed memorandum to the Securities and Exchange Commission. It was also sent to the private email addresses of every potential investor you were entertaining on that yacht. It contained a full factual analysis of Sterling Pay's fraudulent accounting, complete with copies of your own expense reports." He fumbled for his phone, his thumb swiping frantically at the screen. I could see the notifications flooding in. A cascade of panic. Email subject lines flashed on the screen. "Urgent merger off. Regarding Sterling Pay financials. A dozen text messages from the very men he had been laughing with just yesterday, their tone now furious, demanding answers. He had not just lost a deal. He had been professionally executed. He was no longer a tech visionary. He was a pariah. It was then that he finally broke. He was a cornered animal with nothing left to lose. He slammed his hand on the table, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. "You can't take everything," he roared, his voice cracking. "I still have the house." "The house is ours. Chloe would never, she would never let you." I let a small cold smile touch my lips. "Ah, the house," I said softly, as if remembering a minor detail I'd almost forgotten. "You see, Blake, in my line of work, you learn to advise your clients to protect their most valuable assets from liability. And my daughter is the most valuable client I have ever had. When you two were married, I gave her a piece of advice. I told her that the house her mother and I bought for her should remain her separate property, legally shielded from any of your business dealings. It was a simple premarital asset declaration." I paused, letting the final words land with the force of a physical blow. "That house, Blake, has never been yours. The deed has only ever had one name on it. And it is not yours." That was the moment he shattered. The three layers of his world, his personal finances, his professional career, and his marital assets had been systematically dismantled and destroyed in less than 10 minutes. He stared at me, his mouth agape, his mind finally comprehending the sheer, inescapable totality of his ruin. He looked at the papers, at David's face on the screen, at me. There was no escape. There was no one to con. There was nothing. A sound escaped his throat, a raw guttural noise that was not quite a word and not quite a scream. He shot to his feet, sweeping the folder and my phone off the table in a crash of plastic and paper. "You did this," he shrieked, his voice ragged with hysteria. "You old man, you planned this all along. You ruined me." He lunged across the table, his face a mask of incoherent rage. But before he could reach me, the conference room door burst open. Two large hospital security guards, alerted by the shouting, stepped into the room, their expressions grim and professional. The play was over, and it was time for the actor to be escorted off the stage. For 3 days, I lived by the rhythm of the machines. I watched the steady green line of Chloe's heartbeat, listened to the soft hiss of the ventilator, and learned to distinguish the different tones of the alarms. I worked from the uncomfortable chair beside her, slept in it, and ate the tasteless hospital food they brought me. And I waited. Then, on the 4th morning, as the Hawaiian sun began to paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, her eyelids fluttered. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible, but it was a signal. The doctors came, they checked her responses. They lowered her sedation, and a few hours later, she was breathing on her own. Her eyes opened hazy and confused at first, then slowly focusing on my face. A weak smile touched her lips. "Dad." She whispered, her voice a dry, raspy sound. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. I took her hand, my thumb stroking her knuckles. "I'm here, honey. I'm right here." She looked around the room, her brow furrowed in confusion. Her eyes searched the corners, the empty chair on the other side of her bed, the doorway. Then she looked back at me, and her eyes held the question I had been dreading since the moment I booked my flight. "Where's Blake?" she asked, her voice small, vulnerable. Is he okay?" I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times. I had considered every possible approach. I could lie, tell her he was on his way, that he was tied up with business, anything to spare her this pain in her most fragile state. But a lie is just a debt to the truth, and the interest it accrues is always devastating. My daughter was a strong woman who had been made to believe she was weak. The greatest gift I could give her now was not comfort, but clarity. The only path to true healing is through the cold, hard landscape of the truth. I pulled my chair closer, never letting go of her hand. Chloe. I began my voice as gentle as I could make it. You're safe now. You're going to be okay. But we need to have a difficult conversation about Blake. I told her everything. I didn't use an angry or accusatory tone. I simply laid out the facts one by one like stones in a pathway. I told her about the 18 hours he was unreachable. I told her about his arrival, his performance, and the lies he told. And when she looked at me with disbelief clouding her eyes, I knew I had to show her. I'm not doing this to hurt you, I said softly, as I picked up my phone. I'm doing this because you deserve to know the truth. You need it to heal. I showed her the picture. The yacht. The champagne, the triumphant, laughing face of her husband, time-stamped to the exact moment she was fighting for her life on an operating table. She stared at the image, her breath catching in her throat. A single tear traced a path down her temple and into her hair. No, she whispered. There must be a reason. There is, I said, and then I told her about the company. I explained the Ponzi scheme, the stolen money, the web of lies he had built around them both. I didn't show her the spreadsheets or the legal documents, not yet. I just gave her the truth in its simplest form. Her life with him had been a performance funded by my money and her trust. The denial in her eyes crumbled, replaced by a wave of comprehension, so painful it was like a physical blow. The tears began to fall freely now, silent at first, then building into deep, soul-shaking sobs. She wept for the man she thought she loved. She wept for the betrayal. But as I held her hand and listened, I realized she was crying for something more. She was crying for herself. How could I have been so blind? She choked out between sobs. All the signs were there. The spending, the excuses. How could I be so stupid? You weren't stupid, I said firmly, my grip on her hand tightening. You were trusting. You were loyal. You loved him. He exploited those things. That is his failure, Chloe, not yours. She cried for a long time. I just sat with her, a quiet, solid presence in the wreckage of her old life. It was a terrible, agonizing, and absolutely necessary moment. The poison was coming out. The fever of the lie was breaking. The wound so long hidden was finally open to the clean, antiseptic air of reality. And for the first time in a very long time, my daughter's healing could truly begin. The confrontation in the conference room was the storm. What followed were the quiet, methodical days of cleaning up the wreckage. Blake simply vanished. After being escorted out of the hospital, he checked out of his hotel and disappeared, leaving behind a digital and financial ghost. He didn't answer calls from his lawyers, from the bank, or from the other investors he had conned. He just evaporated, a coward who couldn't face the consequences of the world he had built. He left a blizzard of angry emails and impending lawsuits in his wake, a mess that was no longer my concern. My concern was the quiet, steady work of rebuilding. From my chair beside Chloe's bed, I turned the hospital room into a remote command center. With David Reed on a perpetual video call from Denver, we began the process of untangling the financial web Blake had woven. It was the work I had done my entire life, but it had never felt so personal. Every document signed, every asset liquidated was an act of restoration. The first to go was the Porsche. David's contacts arranged for it to be repossessed from the airport parking garage and sold at auction. The money was wired to an escrow account we had set up. Next, we liquidated the brokerage account, selling off the stocks he had bought, with money he didn't truly have. The shares in Sterling Pay were, as I had suspected, completely worthless digital certificates, representing a company that had never really existed. The assets we seized were not a windfall. They were simply the recovered fragments of my original loan, the salvage from a sunken ship. The first bill we paid was from the Queen's Medical Center. It was a staggering amount, a testament to the skill and resources required to pull my daughter back from the brink. I instructed David to wire the full amount that same day. There was a quiet, profound satisfaction in that act. The money Blake had acquired through lies and deceit was now being used to pay for the consequences of his neglect. His vanity was paying to heal the wounds his ego had ignored. It was the first step in re-establishing order in balancing the scales. What remained of the liquidated assets was not an insignificant sum. It was enough to cause temptation in some. But to me, that money was never mine. I had written off my original $500,000 as a loss the moment I signed the check, considering it the price I had to pay for my daughter's perceived happiness. This recovered money was hers. It was the restitution for what had been taken from her. With David's guidance, I used it to establish an irrevocable trust in Chloe's name. It was a financial fortress, designed with all the skill and foresight I possessed. The terms were simple. The assets were hers to control, to use for her recovery, to build a new life, to start her own business. But the principle was protected, shielded by layers of legal bedrock, making it untouchable to any future creditors from Blake's disastrous life, or for that matter from any future man who might try to exploit her kindness. I wasn't just giving my daughter money. I was giving her back the security that Blake had systematically stolen. I had tried to build a wall around her once, a wall of hope and trust in her husband. That wall had crumbled because it was built on a foundation of lies. This time I was building it myself, not with hope, but with legal steel and financial concrete. This wasn't an act of revenge against Blake. Revenge is a chaotic, emotional act. This was an act of order. This was a father seeing a breach in the defenses and methodically, quietly repairing the wall. 6 months later, the scent of antiseptic had been replaced by the crisp, clean smell of pine from the mountains that stood guard over my Denver home. The frantic beeping of hospital machines was a distant echo replaced now by the soft scratching of a pencil on paper and the gentle murmur of the wind through the aspen trees in my yard. I sat on my back porch, a warm mug of coffee in my hands, and watched my daughter. Chloe was sitting across from me at the patio table, a large drawing tablet propped on her knees. Her hair had grown back soft and dark, and the haunted, fragile look in her eyes had been replaced by a focused, determined light. She was sketching, her hand moving with a renewed confidence. She was designing a small, sustainable community center, the first project for the architectural firm she was now building for herself. She was not just recovered. She was remade, stronger, wiser, and with a quiet resilience I had not seen in her since she was a little girl. She looked up from her work and caught me watching, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "What are you looking at?" she asked. "The best investment I ever made," I said, and we both understood I wasn't talking about money. She smiled again and went back to her drawing. In that quiet, comfortable moment, watching her create something new from the wreckage of her past, the full meaning of the last 6 months settled into place. The chaos had been replaced by a quiet, solid order. In my world, the world of risk management, we spend our lives assessing risk to protect assets. I spent 40 years of my life protecting the assets of corporations. But I learned the most important lesson of my career in a sterile hospital room in Hawaii, watching my daughter sleep. The greatest risk we face in our lives is not the loss of money. It is the misplacement of trust. Money can be recovered. A building can be rebuilt. But trust, once shattered, leaves a wound that can poison everything. And the best insurance policy against that kind of risk, the only one that truly works, is the truth, no matter how brutal or painful it may be. The truth is a harsh medicine, but it is the only cure for the disease of a lie. I looked at my daughter, her face illuminated by the afternoon sun, and I felt a wave of pride so deep it almost hurt. I didn't ruin a man's life. I did not act out of revenge or hatred. I simply did what I have always done. I assessed a catastrophic risk to my most valuable asset, and I took the necessary steps to neutralize it. Blake Sterling was a liability that had to be written off. I didn't destroy him. I simply handed him the bill for his own choices. This story reveals a fundamental truth: our greatest vulnerability isn't found on a balance sheet, but in a misplaced trust. I once believed that protecting my family meant maintaining peace, even at the cost of ignoring painful realities. I learned that true protection demands clarity, not comfort. It requires the courage to face deception head-on and use the tools of truth and accountability to restore order. This is not a story of vengeance. It is a lesson in justice. It proves that we all have the strength to defend what is truly valuable from those who only understand price. If you believe that true strength is measured by the courage to protect the ones you love, show your support by liking this video, subscribing, and sharing your thoughts in the comments below.